Good morning. It is fantastic to be back behind the microphone speaking with you today on the podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, thank you so much for tuning in. I actually have the privilege of speaking with an amazing therapist today, Vince Cosentini. Now, Vince has been practicing massage since 2001 and right now works with elite sports people and teams across Australia. He is actually employed in football, Australia, football being what we Victorians would call soccer. And he's got a long history with them, as well as having worked with the Australian Institute of Sport for many years and attending things like the Olympics and Commonwealth Games and other elite level sports world championships as a massage therapist. He's also really open with sharing his stories and what his journey has been like as he's got to this fantastic place. And he obviously, as you hear him speak, he really loves what he does. He loves life and has had a few ups and downs along the way to be able to get there as well. So this is a really encouraging story filled with really practical tips. If you happen to love massage and love sports and maybe see yourself working in that field of those things together, then this is going to be super inspirational for you. And I really encourage you to dive deep and listen carefully to what Vince has to say. Fantastic to have you on the podcast today, Vince. Thank you so much for coming in and agreeing to speak with us. Look, I'm really excited to hear some of the stories that you've got around your journey to get where you are today. So I was wondering if you could just start with sharing some of that. Share with us what it is you're doing right now that you're most proud of, most excited of, and then maybe we'll start to dive into how you managed to get to that amazing place.
Sure. Yeah, look, thanks, James. And I'm really happy to be here to share my journey with you and the listeners as well. So for those that don't know me, so I'm a massage therapist based in Canberra, and I have been a practicing therapist now for 22 years. All of my training was done through the local TAFE in Canberra, CIT, for those that know it. And I had a grand ambition to work in elite sport, and I've been very fortunate enough that I have had that opportunity to work in elite sport. So during my journey as a therapist, I started off working at grassroots level through a local football club. So football club for me is my reference to soccer for most people. So the Victorians listening in will think football is AFL, but I will be saying football is soccer.
It's a round football.
It is a round ball game. So exactly right. So yeah, look, I cut my teeth at the grassroots level in Canberra with the local football club, with the grand ambition to work in elite sport, which for me was very fortunate. My first break was working with the local National Basketball League team, which was the Canberra Cannons back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So when I was going through my study, I managed to get a sort of a work experience position with them. And then I worked with them in their final 2 years before they folded as a franchise. And then for me, I worked in clinical practice, which I'm still in clinical practice, but that just gave me the experience to get a better understanding how to work as a remedial massage therapist. And I think for me, my fortunate break was in 2005 when I landed a 5 to 6 month contract at the Australian Institute of Sport as a massage therapist. And it was a backfill position. And I applied and I got it. And literally the year after, 2006, I was appointed as a sports massage therapist there. And I spent 13 wonderful years of my career at the AIS. And in that journey, it took me all over the world. And forever grateful because it gave me the drive that I wanted as a therapist, gave me, and it ticked that box of, the passion that I wanted and I wanted to achieve. It saw me go to 2 Olympic Games, 2 Commonwealth Games, 4 World Championships with boxing, World Championships with canoe kayak, World Championships with swimming, all within that time frame. And then in 2018, the AIS had a rebranding as such, and they went down a different path, and we were all made redundant, which was very interesting as a full-time employee to go through having a full-time job to nothing. And that was sort of the kick in the teeth for me because I needed to step up and go, you know what, I'm now going to run a business. And I set up my own clinic and I started employing staff. And that was when things, fell into place for me. I managed to get a job with Football Australia, or Football Federation Australia at the time, where they appointed me as a massage therapist for the Socceroos. Now, for me, football is something I grew up playing, I grew up watching, and it was something that I considered to be part of my DNA. So to have the opportunity from 2018 to work with the Socceroos was like a lifelong ambition, and it has, and it still does, take me to some amazing places, which we can touch on later. But I look at it and go, I am so fortunate because I have achieved what I wanted to achieve in my career. And I don't think there's many therapists that can say that. And, here we are, 2023. I'm in my 9th year on the board of Massage and Myotherapy Australia, which is my final year. I've seen some amazing things on the board. I've been part of some massive changes to our industry, and I'm forever grateful for where I've come from and where I am today.
What a fantastic story. And I guess what I'm hearing is you've achieved some amazing stuff, but it hasn't all happened overnight either, right? Like there has been a progression of enjoyment over time there. I just want to jump in, especially around the soccer, as I would call it, around the football. Australia has been so gripped with soccer fever the last few months with the Women's World Cup going on. Did you have any involvement with that yourself?
Look, I was very fortunate through a different stream of coverage. I don't work on the women's side. I work on the men's side with Football Australia, but I was very fortunate that I managed to secure a contract through FIFA. So FIFA is the world football body, where they set up a base camp in Sydney. And the base camp in Sydney was there to look after all of the match officials, so the referees as such. So I was very, very lucky to have a 5-week contract working alongside the professional referees. And, for me, it was an eye-opener. I'm not going to lie, because I've always worked with athletes, and I'm not saying that the referees aren't athletes, because I can tell you now that they are, seeing them do what they do on a day-to-day basis. But I never thought you would get to the point where the referees need as much treatment as what they do. You always think of, look, I'm going to work in sport, I'm going to work with an athlete. You don't think of the match officials. But on average, a match official for a football game will run between 12 to 16 kilometres. Now, if you said, to your weekend warrior, go for a 12 to 16 kilometre run, you're probably going to recommend they come in and get some treatment afterwards. So why is it any different with a match official? So, it was 5 weeks of my life based in Sydney, which was amazing. And I learnt a lot working with international therapists. They do things different to what we do in Australia. And, so I'm forever learning, even though I've been a therapist for over 20 years. But yeah, look, it was fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah, experience. What a great peak experience to get to as well. I do want to loop around a little bit, just because I know there'll be people listening to this or watching who are into sports, and they might have entered massage therapy to get into sports. It's a really common pathway. And I know you're doing all this cool stuff, and people are going to find that really inspiring. But if someone is earlier on in their journey, if they're just saying, I'd love to work with soccer, I'd love to work at the Olympic Games, like, what's the best way to start? What, for someone who's maybe earlier right now, what would you suggest is their pathway forward?
Yeah, look, that's a question I get all the time. And whenever I'm out presenting my workshops, most people will see what I've done and go, Vince, I want to do what you do. And it's like, that's great, because I will try and help you get to, those levels. But you have to remember, and I always use the analogy of you must crawl before you run. You can get to the bright lights, and you can get to an Olympic Games, you can get to a World Cup, or whatever you deem as that pinnacle for you as an individual therapist working with that team. But you need to cut your teeth somewhere, and that somewhere has to be at the grassroots level. And so it has to be at a local football club, a local hockey club, a local swim club, whatever the sport is that you're passionate about. You have to cut your teeth there, because at that point, that's where you're learning. That's where you're making a name for yourself. When it comes to working in a more professional setting with a professional club, I know there's so many therapists out there that are working with companies out there that pick up NRL and AFL and whatnot. That's great. That's great learning. But at the end of the day, and I've said this to a few people, if your end goal is to work in the Olympics, The last time I looked, NRL and AFL was not in the Olympics. And so if you want to work in the Olympics, you need to align yourself to Olympic sports. And that's the only way that you will get to an Olympic Games, if that's your passion. And I know a few people that will probably listen to this podcast have had experience at Olympics like I have. It's a tough gig, and it's not something that everyone will get the opportunity. And if I think back to the last games, which were Tokyo, which were obviously COVID-affected games, and you look at the selection criteria, what most people don't realise, if you need to have a minimum of 5 years postgraduate experience. So if we're talking about these games coming up next year, we're thinking, okay, we're now in 2024, okay, well, at what point did you have to graduate to have those 5 years experience? So if we're saying 24, you have to have 5 years experience, we do the math, you had to graduate in 2019 or earlier before you're even considered. So if you're now talking about 2028 Olympics, okay, anyone within that time frame from 2020 on, you're looking at 2028 and beyond. But then you've got everyone else is trying to compete with you to get to an Olympic Games. And so, yes, it's an amazing experience, but it is so cutthroat. And I always say to people, I've had 2 Olympic Games under my belt, 2 of the best experiences I've had. And I would always encourage people to do an Olympic Games if they can. But also remember, there's much more out there than the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games, for that fact. You know, going with the team to a World Cup or a World Championships is so exciting also.
Yeah, that's great. Just out of interest, if you're taking a team to the Olympics, for example, how many massage therapists would actually be involved? Like the Australian squad across all sports, how many therapists would there be?
So every Olympic Games is different. Generally speaking, you have a medical headquarters, which is made up of sports doctors, physiotherapists, dietitians, a nurse, and massage therapists. On average, you're going to get 6 to 8 in medical headquarters. Now, some of the bigger sports, swimming, athletics, cycling, rowing, they will take their own therapists also. And that can be because of their size, it can be geographically where they're located, but then you have the sports that are within the village compound or not far out of the village. They will come and go from the village where the medical headquarters is. So they'll utilise medical headquarters. So you're going to get a collection of different therapists working across 2 different sites as such, depending on who they're working with. But yeah, on average, if you said medical headquarters, it's 6 to 8.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, you know, like people right now might need to be preparing for 2028 or beyond.
Yes.
We're really talking about everyone who's been graduating up to this point, really trying to work themselves into that position, if that is their goal, of being one of maybe 8 or a handful more therapists, which is a pretty tight crew to be aiming at, right?
Oh, absolutely. And you've got to factor in also, going to an Olympic Games isn't for everyone. And I know we've talked about this offline when I presented at the conference in New Zealand. And I made this point to many people, you have to remember going to an Olympic Games, and Commonwealth Games is similar, it's a voluntary position. Now, not everybody understands that going to those games, you're not going to get paid. So you are giving up potentially up to 5 weeks of your time, and you won't get a cent for it. Now, if you're in a clinical setting where you're relying on your clients coming in day to day to day, and you have a quota in your head, and you know that you have to see so many patients per week, going to an Olympic Games may not be for you, because you have to then start factoring in 5 weeks of no pay. So it's not for everyone. And I say to a lot of people, and I'm very fortunate, I have a very supportive wife. You need to, if you're in a relationship, have a very supportive partner, because when you are traveling with sports, you're away for a long time. And so you do leave a lot of burden at home, and you need someone to pick up the pieces. So factor that in also.
Yeah, so we've got a team at home as well as a team that you're supporting on the road.
Absolutely. That's so true.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that, actually. And I know you do quite a lot of training yourself. You do a lot of speaking and presenting and training for therapists in the industry, which is great. And you mentioned you're on the board for Massage and Myotherapy Australia, which is the biggest association in Australia. And I know you've had some really interesting initiatives that you've been able to implement through that side of things as well. That is almost like, you're working in the industry, you're doing some great work with your clients and with sports teams, but then you're also stepping up into that kind of higher level of, I don't know, leadership or guidance within the industry as well, and actually helping in that way. I'd love it if you could share a little bit about the initiative you've had with Massage and Myotherapy Australia, because I think that ties together really neatly. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So obviously my background is sports massage, and I'm very passionate about sports massage. And I've presented in Australia, but I've presented internationally on what sports massage is all about, and what to, generally have a better understanding of how you can actually work in that field. And it was something that the president, Gary Lavis, at the time, sort of set out a bit of a task to all of the directors to come up with an initiative. And being that this is my final term, I thought, I'm going to go out with a bang. I want to set up a bit of a legacy for the Massage and Myotherapy Australia. And I came up with the initiative of a National Sporting Organisation Scholarship, or an NSO scholarship. And the whole premise behind it is, how do we give experience to members of Massage and Myotherapy Australia to work with elite national sporting organisations? Because at the end of the day, as I touched on earlier, to work with those elite sports, you have to cut your teeth somewhere. So at times, if we can jump a few hurdles and make the inroads for them, the therapists are going to kick on from that. Now, in a previous life, when I wasn't on the board, I worked with Anne Davey, who is the current CEO of Massage and Myotherapy Australia, and we set up the AIS scholarship. So when I worked at the AIS, we brought in members, and they came to the AIS, and they spent anywhere from 10 to 14 days in Canberra, and they got to see what it was like to work in a high-performance environment. So with that in my head, I thought, okay, we can sort of adapt that a little bit. We know it can work. We know the membership will enjoy it, and they'll be receptive of it. So we created that NSO scholarship. So we have two that are actively running. One has just concluded, and that was the Unisport Australia Scholarship. So what that was we had one member that went to the World University Games in China, which was in July of this year, I think it was, and he was part of the Australian medical team. Now, where this all gets interesting is Unisport Australia would typically outsource those recruitment, where they would just email anyone out there and say, would you like to come to World University Games? So what I had done is I connected the two dots. I connected Massage and Myotherapy Australia. I connected Unisport Australia and said, we can collaborate. We have, and as you touched on, we have the largest membership in Australia. I think it's around about 8,700 at the moment. And I said to Unisport Australia, we can guarantee you a high-level therapist. No need to worry about going out into the market. We'll find someone for you. And we did. Paul Gilders was his name. He went to China, and it was the best experience of his life. And for those that are part of Massage and Myotherapy Australia, you can read, you'll have a journal entry, I think at the end of the year. And he just was forever grateful of how well that went. So that was the first scholarship. The second scholarship, which we are at the back end of this week going to announce the recipients, it's two scholarships. It's working with Football Australia, and it's two 9-month scholarships working with the Pararoos and the Paramatildas teams. So the Pararoos is the Paralympic male football team, and the Paramatildas is the Paralympic women's football team. So they have competition in October of this year. They have the Asian Oceania qualifier, which is their precursor to the World Cup, which is in July of next year in Spain. So the whole idea behind this scholarship is these two therapists will be embedded in the two programs. They will be mentored by myself to working in elite sport. They'll be mentored by other sports science, sports medicine staff at Football Australia. And they will have that opportunity to work in those environments with the goal of going to a World Cup in July of next year, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I'm excited to see who gets announced. I won't twist your arm too hard because it sounds like that's not ready to be released just yet. But
that's not ready to be released. No.
Because I'm sure there'll be people listening to this and they're like, "What? These scholarships sound amazing. Like, how could I get in on that?" What's the process for someone who's in that position?
So obviously these two scholarships have now closed. So we'll have those recipients announced for the Football Australia one at the end of the week. The vision is that these will continue annually. So it is a big part of what the board has set out as part of our strategic plan. We are very big as a board, directors, on giving back to the membership. And this was one of my initiatives. And I really feel like if we can give to the membership that ability to work in sport, it's a great opportunity for most people who do want to work in sport, but they just have to stay tuned and they have to just be part of Massage and Myotherapy Australia. That's the first and foremost. I can't stress that enough. It's only open to Massage and Myotherapy members. And then they just got to stay tuned to the emails that come out, the journal entries that they'll see, because that's where it's all advertised. And when they feel like it's something that they want to be part of, they can just apply. Now, I know my fellow directors, they all have different initiatives, and it's something that the membership have to just be aware of, that we are doing so much for the membership at the moment. And we understand that a lot of people are doing it tough at the moment.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, really great opportunity for people who are members or want to be members of that association. That's awesome. I want to just ask you a little bit more about your personal journey too, because all of that is really great for what's happening right now, but it's been a big journey to get here. And I was wondering if you could say, from all the different things you've done, all the Olympics, all the high elite level sports that you've attended, is there maybe one memory or one experience that stands out as like your best, proudest moment, something really cool that you can share with us?
Look, I would have to say it's just been biased because football is life for me. It was going to the World Cup in 2022. So I went to Qatar as part of the Socceroos medical staff. And I think for me, and those that are football fans, or maybe most people who understand sport would have heard of the name of Leo Messi or Lionel Messi, who is probably arguably the best player to ever, get on the pitch. We had a round of 16 game against Argentina, so Australia versus Argentina. And I remember being in the tunnel and watching the Argentinians walk out for the warm-up, led by Messi, who's the captain. And I think it was at that moment, even though we had been there already for 3.5 weeks, I was like, wow. I've somewhat made it in that aspect. Now, when I say that, wholeheartedly, because it was a wow moment for me. And, I've had other great opportunities and I've met other people. Like, in 2016, I remember standing side by side with Usain Bolt and in the food hall at the Olympics. But for me, it was like, oh, that's Usain Bolt. That's pretty cool. But when Messi walked past, even though I didn't have a photo with Messi, it was like, yeah, I'm pretty content now. And so for me, that was probably my wow moment, knowing that I've made it. And that was just me saying I've made it. No one else had to tell me that I had made it. People have since told me I've made it. But at the end of the day, that was my wow moment. Now, I have to stress, that was the wow moment, but I had some downside as well. Yeah. And that was, leading through COVID, and I understand a lot of members, they potentially had to shut their business. They couldn't operate. I was very fortunate, if you want to call it fortunate, but I kept working. And we as the medical staff, the Socceroos, because we were qualifying for the World Cup, we kept going. And so I traveled the world, and I tell people many stories of traveling the world through COVID and, going through airports, and you could pretty much count on two hands how many people were there, apart from your party. And I did it tough. There was a period there in 21 where I spent 3 months traveling, and at home I spent 2 weeks pretty much every month. So the way it went was I traveled for 2 weeks. I came back to Australia. I did 2 weeks of COVID quarantine in a hotel. I went home for 2 weeks. I traveled for 2, and I did that on a 3 rotation. So I did 6 weeks of COVID hotel quarantine in a 3-month window, which drove me absolute batty. And I know the Victorians listening will go, well, that's only 6 weeks. We did however long, which is perfectly fine. But what people have to remember was I was in solitude confinement. So I was on my own in a hotel room where the window doesn't open. The door is literally shut, and you had the food delivered, and it was not a great time. So I look at these wow moments and go, you know what? They were great, but I had to put in the hard yards to get there. And, there's a lot of sacrifice that most people don't see. Everyone always sees the bright lights and they go, I want to be there for the bright lights. But there's a lot of hard work and a lot of heartache that goes into those bright lights.
Yeah, I love that. And thanks for sharing, because you're right. It's not an easy journey. And what I hear in that is that it takes commitment. You've had a high level of commitment to sticking to the path, getting through those challenges, and dealing with what happens alongside of that. Because a lot of people might not have challenges at that level or at that time, but all of us do have challenges on the path to getting to where we want to get to. And the minute we kind of go, oh, this is all just too hard, I'm bowing out, I'm going back to the job at Woolies or whatever, like that's when things stop. But if you can work through those challenges, this is where you end up. And I think that's a really great example of how just like long commitment to the one end goal gets you to that place. So thanks for sharing. It's a really inspiring conversation, Vince. I really appreciate it. One final question I guess I might ask is, if someone, because I know you do some training and some mentoring and that sort of thing, if someone is out there and they're thinking, I'd love to connect with Vince and just see, if there's a training opportunity or something, what's the best way they might do that?
Yeah, look, thanks for that. I think the best way is they go to my website, which is the Smart Centre. So centre is spelled CENTRE.net.au. So the smartcentre.net.au. The idea is I try not to plan courses. I'm very much someone that likes a clinic or a school or an institution to reach out and say, hey, can you come and present a one-day workshop, or can you come and do a presentation? I'm very much someone who believes in giving back. So I'm not so much inclined to go, I'm only going to be in this location and that's it. If you want to come and see me, come and see me. No. I'm very much, if you want me to come and have a look or come and have a chat to you, that's fine, reach out. So on my website, there's a courses tab. You can click on there and send me an email, and I'm more than happy to come out. I do say to people that when it comes to sport, pretty much in Australia, I'm the only one that works in sport, that presents on sport. There's many people that present on sport that used to work in sport or have never worked in sport. And I'm a really big believer, if you're going to work in an industry and in a specific field, why not go to someone who's actually actively working in that field? And so I always stress to people, not to say people are giving false information by any means, but what I'm trying to get at is everything that I portray is up to date and it's current. And it's what you are expected to know today, not what you were expected to know 10 years ago. And so I always say to people, whatever I know today, I will share with you today. Okay, and so that's one of the big things. The other thing is, I know Instagram's a big hit these days, and I have a handle there called the Elite Football Therapist, which just tracks my journey. And for those that are interested, it's very much a photo collage of where I am in the world and what I'm doing, and it's all the nice stuff, to be perfectly honest. It's literally people can live through my photos of where I am in the world and what I'm up to. And look, I talked to you today, from Canberra. Last week I was in Dallas and in a week from now I'm in London. So, I travel a fair bit, and I love what I do, and that handle, Elite Football Therapist, gives people the opportunity to follow my journey and go, yeah, look, I just want to do what he does, and you can live it through me to a point.
That's fantastic. I will definitely put links to both of those in the show notes as well. So that's really cool. And yeah, thanks for being so open with your training and also with us today. I really, really appreciate it. All the best on your travels.
Thank you so much, James.
We'll catch up with you soon.
You take care.
You've been listening to the Health Leader Podcast, hosted by James and Alicia Crook, together with Christine Knox, business coaches and modality mentors for massage and manual therapy. Elevate your hands-on skill and your practice to get incredible results at the Health Leader Co. Jump onto Facebook or Instagram and look for the Health Leader Co to connect. Also, please go to iTunes and rate us 5 stars so that even more people can access this podcast.